Hi everyone, welcome back to the Old Stuff Show. My name is Fred. Last time we looked at the old photos and picture frame collectibles, and each show we're planning to look at a different kind of collectible and inform you, show you some samples, look at values, and have a little bit of information to share. So today we are going to be looking at one kind of ephemera. Ephemera means paper stuff, and it used to be that people would say the world is going to drown in paper, but I think with the digital age this is improving a little bit. So, but people do like to collect paper collectibles, ephemera, and there's all kinds. There's many different varieties of that. We'll spend some time in a couple of programs looking at different types. Today, I'd like to look at the postcard. A postcard is one of the more popular paper collectibles, and these go back to the early 1860s when people discovered that they could write something on a small piece of cardboard and send it to a friend. But the golden age of postcard use was in the early 1900s, somewhere between 1903-4 to 1910. And this was an easy way to communicate, especially at a time when not everyone had access to telephones, and telegraph didn't seem to be as convenient. So the postal service, being good at that time, allowed people to use the postcard as a convenient way to communicate with each other. It was inexpensive as well. So postcards are interesting from two perspectives. One, what's on the back, the writing on the back. If you look at the variety of postcards out there, can chronicle the history of the times and the history of the area. It can also add a great deal of understanding about the family. Often they were talking about family matters on the back of the postcards. Sometimes they're expressing their feelings and their emotions, and also references is being made to events on an ongoing basis. People relied on postcards to stay in touch. They couldn't travel necessarily. Maybe someone lived quite a distance, and it was just a convenient thing to use to keep in touch. So the writing on the back offers that type of communication. The postmarks, which were the stamps put on the back of the postcards by the post office, gave the date, the time, and the place sent. And this in itself is a collectible for some people, looking at postmarks, looking at places where there were stations that no longer exist, and occasionally postmarks would indicate the presence of special events, fairs, or whatever they would advertise. And so it in itself is quite an interesting collectible. The stamps on the back were common stamps, so in that sense they're not really collectible, because there were so many of them out there. So, but the stamps are interesting. Certainly the ones in the early 1900s, the early Victorian stamps on those postcards. So that's the back. On the front, the pictures on the front seem to be the most collectible. That garners the most interest, and is the main reason for the collectible. There are many different categories. One of the more sought after type of postcard is called the real photo postcard, or shortened RPPC. And these are cards that have incorporated actual photos taken by photographers, put on the postcard, and they're different from the lithographs. If you looked at the lithographs, you would see on a magnifier lots of little dots, but these are actual photographs that were turned into postcards. Often these garner great interest because they capture places, and people are looking for that. How do you tell the difference between the real photo and the other? If you tilt the real photo postcard up a little bit, it's like an oily finish. It comes out kind of looking oily like, and so that's the real photo postcard. There are photo postcards, and there are lithograph postcards, and in many different categories, as I said. The well-known photographers, sometimes that's in itself a reason to collect. For example, in Western Canada, Byron Harmon was a well-known photographer who took beautiful photographs of the Rockies and Banff and this type of thing, and his postcards became very collectible and show a lot of different things out west in terms of nature. In Central Ontario, the Sarnia, Port Huron, Michigan area, Pesha, P-E-S-H-A, was the photographer who became very popular in terms of collecting. I have seen many Pesha cards. They're very hard to find. I've seen this one is a blow up of a Pesha card, showing the railway car at that point. But his cards, I've seen ice boats on frozen rivers, lots of unique little events that were going on, and it tends to be a localized sort of thing. So he's very collectible. In the lithograph cards, there are many categories, and so most of the collectibles are looked for by things such as small town main streets, railroad stations, trains, military photos of World War I, World War II, personnel events, events like the parades that went on often in the old days. Black Americana, any picture with a black person has been in the past very collectible. Humor, ships, amusement parks. Those are just a few of some of the categories that seem to be popular for collectors. Not so collectible tend to be the greeting cards or the greeting postcards. There are some exceptions, like the regular greeting postcards for Christmas, Easter, St. Patrick's Day, that type of thing, are not quite as valuable, but there are a few that stand out. If you have a greeting card that has a Victorian Santa Claus on it, that could be worth a little more. Old Valentine pictures are quite interesting. One of the more interesting ones that seem to be sought after are the Halloween postcards, and they are quite difficult to find. So if you look at, I have a few examples here. If we just look at this one here, this is a good example of a real photo postcard. It was taken at a scene in rural Ontario. Has a value of about $20, and it's just unusual, and people look for things that are unusual. So that's a good example of a real photo postcard. There's also the kind of brownish sepia. This is another type of postcard, a sepia postcard. This one is interesting because it shows the interior of a restaurant, of a department store that no longer is in business. Sometimes there's nothing on the back, depends, but there's no change in value in terms of whether there's nothing or something, depending on what you're looking for that way. And interior postcards, again, like that one, which is the interior of a restaurant, but it does have information on the back. It has numerous stamps and a postmark. The postmark here is 1952, 53, and lots of writing, lots of information. I mentioned Main Street. This is a little more current, but some of the older main streets of small towns that are no longer around are especially interesting. But really any old main street scene of any town in your area would be quite collectible. Military, First War, Second War military cards were quite collectible and covered a lot of ground, a lot of territory. Again, this is just a postcard with a group of sailors. And individual homes, people like to show off their homes, show their friends, and sometimes they had the photos taken and sent to their friends. Sometimes these were commercially produced, and this would be in the 1920s, 30s era. Mentioned ships. This photo postcard of Great Lakes ships, ocean liner ships are interesting as well. Obviously ones that were well known, the Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary and ships, ocean liners like that. Titanic, if you found a Titanic postcard, you'd have something worth a fair amount of money. And there are some around, but again, they're quite hard to get. This is a postcard that's quite old. It's 1905, and postcards don't go back too much before 1905 in terms of collecting. You can't tend to find them. And it's a souvenir postcard, and this one was taken of a local church. So not a lot of writing on it, but interesting to say the least. And I said to you too earlier, the amusement parks. It's a merry-go-round in one of the beach amusement parks that was popular just when people were on vacation and they had something that they could send home. And like this type of card, which is very unique, very unusual, shows a bridge and an interesting view. Unusual always works when it comes to collecting. Also, there were postcards came in sets. This one that I'm going to show you here is a set of 6, and its theme is the love between a couple. And so you have 3 on this page, and 3 on the next page, and it just was a fun collectible to look for, and seems to be lots of that type of thing around when you're out and about looking. So where do you find these postcards? I've been to shows doing and collectible shows, and I've seen a couple of dealers who have, they say, 100,000 postcards, all categorized in many different kinds of situations. So there's a lot of collectors out there, and they want to find cards that are well organized and accessible. Also, the flea markets, there's always somebody that has a box of postcards or an album of postcards. Some of them aren't worth very much because they're either too new or they're too common, and so the real collectors are looking for ones that are interesting and older, and ones that they don't have. So it's interesting to also look at online type of situation. For example, eBay, lots of postcards on eBay, and there you can take your choice, and if there's something that you need, there it is. There are actual postcard shows that you can go to that focus just on the one collectible of postcards. The antique collectible shows themselves have usually a lot of people that have some postcards that are available. Flea markets, auctions, and you know, there are postcard clubs. Like one of the bigger ones is the Toronto Postcard Club. You can join. There's also things like other people who collect that you can contact and stay in touch, and you can trade and buy from each other. So again, it's going out there looking, it's the hunt, and finding something that you think would be interesting to add to your collection or to somebody else's collection. As far as values, the average postcard really isn't worth a lot, $2, $3, $4. but the ones that people are really looking for, especially like real photo cards, you're getting into the $10 and up range. Ones that are very scarce and very difficult to find. Like I said, the Titanic postcard, you might pay $75 for that one, depending on who owns it and the condition. It's not an investment that's going to hurt you. It's just a lot of fun looking for them and finding out where you can find them. Postcards often too are sold in albums. People have spent a lifetime looking around, and this is the thing about the collector world today. Maybe up to 10 or more years ago, there were a lot of people who were collecting certain kinds of things, and they put a lot of effort into it, a lot of time over the years. They've gotten old, and they decided they don't want it anymore. Their children don't want it, so they're willing to sell. So the market isn't as big, and there's not as much demand as there was even 10 years ago for postcards. But it's if you're looking for yourself, there's a great opportunity there for sure. Finding albums is one thing. Finding individual cards is another. I used to have some fun when I went to outside of my own country. I'd take some postcards with me to that country, of that country, and often I got enough money from somebody to pay for my lunch. So it was kind of fun because they weren't postcards that I wanted. The hardest time I had was when I went over to France and I took some French postcards over. He didn't speak English, I didn't speak French, and somehow through sign language we managed to strike a deal. But that was fun. So yes, postcards are international. No matter where you go in the world, you'll find people there collecting and buying and selling postcards. So it's a great investment, great amount of fun, and I encourage people to think about getting into that type of thing. Ephemera is such a large category of paper collectibles that you really have to break it down and focus on one thing, and then within that collectible you want to focus just on one aspect, maybe your own community. I had myself a collection of about 800 plus postcards from my own community, but like a lot of people, I don't tend to want to keep this stuff forever, and so I needed to buy something at the time, and so I sold it to a gentleman, and he was very happy to get it. But I'd spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to get 800 of these. Apparently there's something like 1,200 available, so I thought I'd done pretty well. But don't get tied to it. A lot of people want to leave their collections to their family, but that's another issue. Some of the younger folks just aren't interested in the collectibles that the older folks have worked on over the years. They're not necessarily keen on inheriting it or carrying on. So a lot of people just say, okay, my kids don't want it, I'll cash it in and I'll enjoy the money from what I've been able to gather over the years. People who collect also realize that you don't have a whole bunch of space to store things, and in terms of postcards, they can be stored in albums or in boxes of some sort, organized properly, very easily. So it's not an onerous type of collectible to get into. So that's this show. The last show we talked about old photographs and old picture frames, another two popular categories. Today we've talked about old postcards. It's the tip of the iceberg. There's so much out there, and I have the knowledge and the experience, and I hope to share that with you in the future. I mentioned before that I have a eBay site that a lot of these things are available on. I do sell postcards, photographs, and other type of ephemera on that site. You can look up the moniker, the ID Lonrem, L-O-N-R-E-M, and you'll see the listings there, and so those are my things. And you're more than welcome to take a look, and if you have questions, there's a way of communicating with me through that site. So happy collecting, and hope you've enjoyed learning some more about this collectible, and I enjoy providing you with that information. And we'll see you again sometime soon with another collectible on the Old Stuff Show. Thank you very much. Good night.